A criminal trial is a machine for testing claims, built on the assumption that a claim unable to survive scrutiny will not survive the room. Almost every kind of physical or forensic evidence a jury hears arrives with a visible seam. There is a chain of custody, a methodology, or an assumption that an advocate can interrogate. An eyewitness identification arrives without one. What the courtroom receives is a person, present, who points and says, "That is him." There is no apparatus to interrogate, and no interval between the claim and the person. The witness is not offering an inference for the jury to check. The witness is offering a memory, and a memory cannot be handed over for inspection. By the time it reaches a courtroom, it has become a single, clean assertion. That fundamental lack of a seam is precisely why eyewitness testimony does the work it does. We can see the persuasive weight of this evidence in mock juror experiments conducted by researcher Elizabeth F. Loftus. 3 groups of mock jurors heard the same case. When the case was built on circumstantial evidence alone, it persuaded only a modest share of the mock jurors to convict. When an eyewitness identification was added to that same case, convictions jumped to a large majority. When that eyewitness was actively discredited, shown to have poor eyesight and no glasses, convictions barely moved. The identification survived its own weakness. This is not because juries are credulous. It is because a confident identification is a kind of evidence the courtroom machinery simply has no natural handle on. Everything a courtroom will later argue about was actually settled in a few minutes, in a room the court never sees, usually with no one present whose job it was to notice what was happening. The first critical moment is who is standing in that room. An identification procedure has an administrator, and the administrator usually knows which face belongs to the suspect. The National Research Council examined this dynamic, noting that decades of scientific evidence demonstrate that expectations can bias perception and judgment, and that expectations can be inadvertently communicated. Even when administrators scrupulously avoid comments that could identify which person is the suspect, unintended body gestures, facial expressions, or other nonverbal cues have the potential to inform the witness. This describes an unconscious channel. It happens without malice, in administrators who are actively trying not to steer the witness. The person running the procedure need not intend anything. Simply knowing the answer is enough. The second critical moment is what the witness is actually being asked to do when presented with a lineup. Researchers propose a mechanism for this, known as the relative judgment account. This account proposes a witness comparing faces side by side naturally makes a relative judgment. Instead of asking, "Do I recognize this person?" they ask, "Which of these is most like the person I saw?" The inherent danger is that a relative judgment always has an answer. Even if recognition comes back empty, comparison does not. Something in any set is always the closest match. It is tempting to finish the thought, to assume that presenting faces one at a time solves this comparison problem. But the National Research Council examined that exact question and found there is, as yet, not enough evidence for the advantage of one procedure over another. They recommended caution and care when considering changes to any existing procedure until clear evidence emerges. The tidy answer is not the established one. A trial has defenses against unreliable evidence, but each of them is aimed at a target this problem does not present. Cross-examination is built for inconsistency. It searches for deception. But a witness who is mistaken, yet honest, has no gap in their story because they are not concealing anything. A jury's own instinct is to watch for hesitation, reasonably treating certainty as a heuristic for reliability. Confidence expressed at an initial, uncontaminated identification under pristine conditions is informative about accuracy. However, confidence expressed later, after feedback and repeated exposure, is not the same quantity and does not carry the same value. Both halves of that are true at once, but only the second, later version of confidence is standing in the courtroom. Confirming feedback after an identification artificially inflates a witness's confidence. It raises their retrospective reports of how good their view was, how much attention they paid, and how easy the identification felt. The quantity with diagnostic value, whether the witness hesitated the first time, whether they qualified it, what they actually said before anyone responded, is usually gone, entirely unrecorded in any form the court can examine. This is the point at which the failures compound. An administrator who knows the answer, a procedure that forces a relative pick, a witness whose confidence afterwards is free to rise, and a courtroom whose instruments are all pointed at deception. Nothing in this account requires anyone to have behaved badly. The witness, the administrator, the jury, the advocate, every participant can act in total good faith. The error still travels the whole way through, gathering confidence as it goes, arriving as the most persuasive thing in the room. Which leaves one question. If nothing inside this legal process can reliably tell a true identification from a false one, if the certainty on offer is the wrong instrument and the room has no other, then how did anyone ever find out how often this went wrong?